Electronic Arts has become a leader in the gaming industry. From Atari to the Sims franchise, Electronic Arts has long been the gold standard in video and computer games. However, in recent years, EA has taken all the fun out of the game. What happened to this once great entertainment empire? From making customers pay to play to unnecessary acquisitions and mergers, Electronic Arts has lost its connection. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to log on, put on your headphones, and settle in for another game of Intellectual Digest, your source for all things intelligent, nostalgic, bygone, and fun. Are you ready to play? Electronic Arts was born in 1982 to three former Apple computer managers, William M. Trip Hawkins III, William Bingham Bing Gordon, and Tom Mott. Trip was a marketing director who, at the age of 26, named himself the head of the new enterprise, which he named Electronic Arts. Bing became the director of marketing, and Tom basically did everything else. Trip and Bing both had MBAs from Stanford University, and they were ready to branch off from Apple Computer and do their own thing. The trio wanted to create a new company that would specialize in the development and marketing of software games for the burgeoning new home computer systems. During a dinner with four other associates at Trip's home, Electronic Arts started with a team of 11 people and a huge and risky investment of $5 million from some private investors. Hopes were high for the new company. EA, as we now call it, started out as a flexible, adaptable company that developed software for whatever was the popular hardware and system at the time. EA developed several different versions of their software for different platforms. In May of 1983, EA's very first product was a game for the Atari 800 game system. A short time later, Atari gave way to the Commodore system. EA made a quick turnaround, and in October of 1983, EA unveiled 6 games for the brand new, state-of-the-art Commodore 64 computer. The next year, in 1984, the computer game Sky Fox was designed and released for the Apple II computer and became an instant bestseller. For those of you who are old enough to remember, did you play games on the Atari or Commodore system? Which game was your favorite? Share your stories in the comments section. Intellectual Digest loves to hear from you. The 80s were a very exciting time in terms of technological advances, and in 1986, the Commodore Amiga was put on the market. And EA promptly created games for the Commodore Amiga system. Commodore Amiga was yet another huge success. In the 80s, the software industry was brand new and not very well understood. Very few people had home computers, which were very expensive, took up a lot of space, and thus were limited to the wealthy and well-to-do. EA had a fresh way of looking at the business of software development. EA stood out from the pack in the way that they modeled the development and production of their games on the entertainment industry, as opposed to the boring, high-pressure software industry. EA games were truly an art form. EA hired graphic arts designers and project managers who were referred to as producers, as well as a talented group of freelancers who came up with genius ideas for new computer games and game scenarios, just as a scriptwriter would submit their work to a Hollywood studio. How awesome is that? When an idea was submitted and approved by EA's in-house committee, that project would be assigned to one of the producers. Most of those early ideas were developed and worked on in-house, and EA always gave plenty of credit to their software developers, designers, and artists. Fairly early on in their history, EA started selling and marketing their software and games overseas. In the mid-80s, $1.5 million out of EA's $30 million in total sales was from international sales. EA established a manufacturing plant in Langley, England, which is known as EA Europe. Trip Hawkins had strategic plans for EA's growth around the world, and he eventually handed the duties of the day-to-day administration to his new senior vice president, Kenneth Zerbe. EA officially went public in September of 1989. That year, EA raked in a massive $63.5 million, with $4 million in net income. EA quickly became the leader in entertainment software in the United States. By the end of the 80s, video game cartridges that ran on players connected to television sets were a lucrative, high-dollar business, because the majority of people buying the game systems had TVs, but very few homes had computers at the time, as we discussed previously. Soon, the sale of game cartridges beat out the floppy disk games that were available for those rare home computers. The key demographic consisted of children and teenagers who flocked to get their hands on the latest system. Nintendo, which featured its own game cartridges, was invented in Japan and accounted for a total of 80% of video game sales in 1989. However, EA decided to produce games for Nintendo's competitors like Sega because they refused to follow Nintendo's contract conditions, which involved EA producing and supplying games exclusively by Nintendo and not any of their competitors. This was EA's first bump in the road. My siblings and I had the original Nintendo growing up, and I have vivid memories of Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt. Were you a Nintendo or a Sega kid? Tell your stories in the comments section. EA kickstarted their contract with Sega by designing a whole series of games for the new Sega Genesis system, which was the very first 16-bit video game player on the market. I grew up playing Sega Genesis as well. It was awesome. My brother and I used to battle it out on Mortal Kombat. These new 16-bit games were twice as fast as the old games, which were only 8-bit. EA developed roughly 10 games for Sega in 1990, even though sales didn't really take off until 1991. The popularity of the Sega system in games was largely due in part to EA's sports games. EA would go on to create 35% of the games that ran on Sega Genesis. EA was officially the leader of the software competition, and they were ready to take over the 90s. What was your favorite Sega Genesis game? We would love to know. By 1990, EA was investing 50% of the development costs for each new product towards retooling and readapting the software, so that the games could be played on all the new systems. EA produced many new games in order to increase the chances of success and profit. EA acquired the marketing rights to software packages that had been developed by other, smaller companies through their affiliated labels program. In the 90s, EA also had contracts with big celebrities like football player and announcer John Madden, basketball legends Michael Jordan and Larry Bird, and chess champion Garry Kasparov. NASA even got in on the game, literally, when astronaut Chuck Yeager was included in the development of a flight simulation game. I'll never forget when my parents bought our family's first home computer. It was a Compaq, and we couldn't get enough of it. It was so exciting. Back in the day, did you have Apple II, Commodore Amiga, Compaq, or any of the other early PC brands? Share your 90s memories in the comments section. EA also had their own sales force. EA's team of salespeople sold EA games to retailers like Egghead Incorporated, Toys R Us, Walmart, and Target. Since EA had so much control over these sales, they were able to keep better track of consumer trends, and therefore were able to monitor and manipulate sales and inventory. That's pretty genius. With all of this success and clout in the industry, of course, EA gained a reputation within the gaming industry for being greedy, for oversaturating the market, and not giving other software companies a fighting chance. Ouch. The 90s were the era of 16 and 32-bit gaming. In 1991, EA purchased licenses for league and team names, logos from the NBA, the PGA, the NHL, and the NHL Players Association, and the MLB and the MLB Players Association. The most popular games were John Madden Football, NHLPA Hockey, Bulls vs. Blazers and the NBA Playoffs, Lakers vs. Celtics in the NBA Playoffs, and PGA Tour. Did you play any of these classics back in the day? Anyway, EA just kept growing, and 1991 also saw EA's expansion into Canada. They purchased Distinctive Software Incorporated and renamed it Electronic Arts Canada Incorporated. This acquisition gave EA a grand total of 115 employees. Wow! 1992 was another big year for EA. The newly crowned software king also formed a joint venture with Victor Musical Industries Incorporated out of Japan. VMI was based in Tokyo, and they were quickly renamed Electronic Arts Victor Incorporated. EAV translated and distributed EA games into Japan and other Asian countries, and EA had officially taken over Japan. Later, in 1992, EA opened another manufacturing facility in Puerto Rico. At this early stage, EA had already translated their games into 7 languages, which were distributed in 31 European countries. EA also began their ill-fated partnership with Origin in 1992. Origin Systems Inc. was a company out of Austin, Texas. Origin at this time was most well known for their Ultima series of fantasy role-playing games, which were available on both floppy disk and the hot new CD-ROM format. Ultima games were perfect to join the EA family and combine the genres of action, simulation, and strategy. The 90s were also big for edutainment, and EA created and diversified educational, yet entertaining software for children between the ages of 3 and 14. I had several educational computer games growing up, and I'm sure EA made most, if not all of them. In 1993, some of the most popular learning games that were released were Ping and Kookie's Cuckoo Zoo, Eagle Eye Mysteries, Peter Pan, a story-painting adventure, and Scooter's Magic Castle. How crazy is that? I had no idea EA was so big. I can definitely see why they received the reputation that they have to this day. EA Europe developed its own division, and 1992 and 1993 were huge in terms of sales in both the US and Europe. 1993 saw even more worldwide expansion and recognition of the EA name. The equipment gradually became more advanced, and EA wanted to pursue their model of Hollywood-style entertainment software publishing even further. EA formed Advanced Entertainment Group and brought together animators, musicians, photographers, scriptwriters, and film directors and producers. This massive merger also brought in live actors through the new innovative process of motion capture technology, which is today a video game industry standard. These actors would be filmed on Hollywood sound stages and were given specific actions to perform. The performances were videotaped and then digitized and integrated into games. I would love to be in a video or PC game. How about you guys? As if they really needed to do so, EA also partnered with Colossal Pictures, who created the hit MTV show Liquid Television. How ironic is it that EA collaborated with MTV at a time when it seemed like they were about to go downhill? Very interesting, if you ask me. EA and MTV joined forces by combining artists from Advanced Entertainment Group and MTV to create software that featured the best in digitized stereo sound, full motion video, and the latest in 3D animation, like the kind that was being done on MTV Liquid Television. At the time, Advanced Entertainment Group's senior vice president, Stuart Bond, was quoted in the company's brochure. "We want to create a place where artists and craftsmen from various disciplines are inspired to gather and collaborate on exciting new forms and images." It was a very inspiring and exciting time indeed. These more creative and realistic games extended EA's market to adults, and both EA and MTV benefited greatly from their partnership. Did you know anything about the EA-MTV connection? In 1994, EA was a monster, and they were investing big money into new and innovative developmental techniques for their games. EA developed Artist Workstation, which revolutionized the way software was designed and adapted for multiple platforms. EA continued to be a pioneer in the way that computer animation and live-action video were put together, and they oversaw the development of the 32-bit hardware format. EA kept creating new games that showed off the new format, and they extensively redesigned a lot of their old games and re-released them. The new games were extremely expensive to produce, but EA felt like all the money and effort was worth it. They just had to be the leader of the pack. EA was always looking ahead to the future, and by the middle of the 90s, EA had many irons in the fire, including interactive movies, travel-based entertainment, and access to their games through interactive cable television. That sounds a lot like our modern-day Rokus and smart TVs and phones, if you ask me. They were definitely ahead of their time. I see you, EA. In 1995, EA purchased land in Redwood Shores, California, in order to build a new headquarters. That same year, EA won the European Computer Trade Show Award for Best Software Builder of the Year. Yes, they did. I had no idea that such a thing existed. Early on in 1997, the video game magazine Next Generation ran an article about how EA was the only software company to see regular profits from video games in the past 5 years, saying that EA had a critical track record second to none. The new EA headquarters was completed in 1998, and there were even more and bigger plans for expansion going into the new century, as if that was possible. In 1999, EA redesigned and replaced their company logo, transitioning from their long-running Shapes logo into one that was based on the popular EA Sports logo that was used at the time. EA got very brand-specific in 1999, and this is when EA became the EA games we all know and love. The EA Sports label was designated for major sports titles and franchises. EA Sports Big was for casual or arcade-style sports, and the full EA Games title was used for co-published and co-distributed titles, so basically everything that wasn't related to sports. The year 2000 was when the problems with EA really began. That year, EA Games, together with Maxis and Will Wright, introduced the world to one of the best-selling video game franchises of all time, and a favorite of mine, The Sims. The Sims is iconic, and is such because they're what are known as sandbox games, which lack any defined goals and are perfect for casual gamers. Players have the ability to either build homes from scratch for their Sims, or move them into pre-built homes, direct their moods, and satisfy their desires. I was crazy about The Sims when I was in junior high and high school. I loved making sim versions of myself, my family and friends, and seeing how they interacted with one another. My mom was even worried at one time because she thought I was too controlling because I played The Sims. How hilarious is that? Back in the late 80s and early 90s, SimCity had been a huge hit, and The Sims built upon the craze for the simulation and control. The original Sims had expansion packs that built on and added to the experience, and augmented and changed what players could do with their Sims. Over the course of the 2000s, the Sims 2 and Sims 3 franchises were also big sellers. These sequels included the expansion packs and extra content to keep players coming back for more. The Sims spawned several spin-offs on various platforms, and The Sims 4 came along in the 2010s. At one point, a live-action movie was reported to be in the works, but never happened. EA Games was, once again, the gold standard that always reflected the current gaming trends, and in the 2000s, simulation was all the rage. However, by 2010, EA, as far as many fans were concerned, had officially lost its luster. In 2011, EA Games launched their digital distribution service, Origin, named after their old friend from the early 90s. Origin is just irritating and doesn't even compare to some of the other online gaming services out there. Origin has limited functionality and has been branded as slow and unreliable. On top of that, EA Games and Origin decided to implement a controversial and unpopular pay-to-play strategy, where gamers have to pay a monthly subscription fee just to have access to their favorite games and franchises, as well as paying for individual packs and extras through microtransactions. EA actually thought that this would give players access to content and features that, in the past, would have taken hundreds of hours to play. As if that wasn't enough, EA and Origin created loot boxes that you also, surprise, have to pay extra for. EA and Origin are making millions off of freemium gaming and our hard-earned money. It's ridiculous. EA has also announced that they're trying to get rid of single-player games altogether, which makes no sense whatsoever. Single-player games are still vital for gamers everywhere, but EA just won't listen. In 2017, EA closed their Visceral Games studio, which was known for some excellent single-player games. Oh, and did I mention that the company that was once singled out for having a healthy work environment is now extremely toxic, according to both former and current employees? There have been reports circulated around the crunch time, which is the crazy time leading up to new releases. Employees claim that they've been forced to work as many as 100 hours a week just to meet deadlines and quotas, and they're not even properly compensated for their efforts. That's just maddening. The situation has gotten so bad that in 2004, some of EA's game artists sued the company and ended up settling for $15.6 million. Supposedly, conditions have gotten better, but that crunch time still exists, and the games just aren't as good as they used to be. EA has also canceled a lot of their competitors and former collaborators, including the aforementioned Visceral Games, Bullfrog, Origin Systems, Maxis, Criterion Games, Black Box, and Westwood. EA pushed these studios too far, making them produce numerous and unnecessary, not to mention poor quality, games and packs that sold miserably. EA has recently acquired the studio Codemasters, so I'm curious to see how that goes. Also, have you noticed that when you purchase a physical disc of an EA game, like The Sims, there's an online passcode included with the game? EA was one of the first companies to inflict this upon customers because they're all about those digital, freemium sales. You're given a code to enable online play, and if you bought the game secondhand, you need $10 in order to engage in multiplayer mode. There's a lot of exclusivity with EA games. In 2005, EA got the exclusive rights to the licenses of the NFL Players Association, and stopped making the popular and beloved NFL 2K series. They also acquired the license for FIFA, and now, the world's best soccer or football leagues aren't allowed to appear or franchise anywhere else. They did the same thing when The Sims 2, 3, and 4 came out. How ridiculous is that? The Sims 2 was perfect and so much fun just the way it was. On that note, EA is notorious for releasing pointless sequels, expansion, and stuff packs. Someone in my family informed me that there's a Sims 4 game pack called Bust the Dust and just has vacuums, brooms, mops, and other objects your Sims can use to clean their house. The game costs $4.99 with an Origin account, and the larger expansion packs cost up to $39.99. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't give EA a single penny of my money for an overpriced game that might not even work. EA is continually changing and getting rid of their most beloved franchises, and they've been given a very bad name within the industry. Gaming is supposed to be fun and affordable, and gamers shouldn't have to spend their entire paycheck just to play their favorite game series. So are any of you Origin members, or are playing any of EA's games like The Sims 4, Plants vs. Zombies, or F122? Or have you unplugged from EA altogether? Congratulations, players! You've reached the end of our saga. That'll be all for today's video. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch and listen. Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and tell everyone about us. Intellectual Digest is always looking for suggestions for content, so let us know what you want us to talk about. I'll see you all next time on another round of Intellectual Digest. Have an intellectual, relevant day.